Hello and welcome to another recording from a Garden Masterclass. We do these once a week, which we post on YouTube as a public service broadcast. Eventually they go into our members archive. Garden Masterclass puts on live events in Britain, day workshops for garden and landscape people, but we also have a terrific webinar program which we run from October through to April. And all those webinars get recorded and are made available from our online library. If you join Garden Masterclass, you can get those at a discount, and you'll also be able to have access to a series of podcasts we're doing. We've recently launched a podcast channel on Substack. Some of that is free. We aim to do a free one every week, but there will also be exclusive members content, a lot of which will be really seriously information packed. So if you're going to be driving or weeding or busy doing something, you can listen to us as well. So do please keep in touch with Garden Masterclass at gardenmasterclass.org. See the amazing range of things we do, and sign up for our monthly newsletter. And if you really like what we do please come and join us.
So this week on Thursday Garden Chat, we are back in the States, and our guest is Ethan Kauffman. And Ethan, literally 2 weeks ago, I was at the conference in Bergamo, and I was walking out of the lecture theatre, and I turned to my right, and there was Ethan. It's like, my goodness me, you're here! How amazing! So it was lovely to see him and catch up. But we had already booked Ethan quite a few months ago to be our guest. And I think, Ethan, we first met at least 3 years ago, probably, when I was at Chanticleer. I came to Stoneleigh with Paul Orpello and Jeff Lynch. It has to be it has to be 3 years ago, I think. And I have to say, they said, you've got to come and see Stoneleigh. I said, okay. And it's a garden, and it's all about natives. I think, oh, you Americans and your native plants, you're just, what is it with these native plants? Okay, I'll come along. And then I was completely blown away by Stoneleigh. It is the most extraordinary garden and just so creative. I was just speechless. It's one of those places which is just, if you're in that area, and Ethan's going to explain exactly where he is, you've really got to see it. It's lovely when you see somebody using plants in such a creative way, with such a sense of no constraints about what you do with them. You just take these plants and use them in a wonderful, inventive and exciting way. So I thoroughly recommend it, and I will never say, oh, not another native garden again. Anyway, so listen, Ethan, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you, Annie. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's great to see you. And just before you go into your presentation, do you want to give us a little bit of your backstory? What led up to Stoneleigh and what you were doing before you went to Stoneleigh?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in public horticulture for about 30 years now, which is hard for me to believe, but there it is. And I never thought I would work with plants. When I was a kid, I loved the outdoors. Like so many of us, I love nature. And I went to college and got a biology degree. And I remember graduating and opening up a newspaper. And I was like, okay, what do I find here? And I didn't know. And there was a zoo job in South Carolina where my girlfriend was at the time. So I moved down there, and I thought, you know what? I'll take this part-time horticulture job. I don't know why they hired me, but they did. And then I'll work in with the animals. But I did it for about a year, and oh my gosh, I loved it. The light bulb just came on, and I just felt so energized. And ever since, it's just been my passion, And I was 8 years managing the zoo horticulture in South Carolina at Riverbank Zoo. And then I was another 9 years at a garden called Moore Farms Botanical Garden in South Carolina, which was a private garden that we transitioned to a public garden. And now 8 years here in Pennsylvania at Stoneleigh as the first director of Stoneleigh Natural Garden.
Wow, wonderful. Okay, so would you like to go into screen share, and we can look at your we can hear all about it? And
Sure.
great.
Okay, how do we look?
That's looking good. Looking really
Yeah.
We're up and running. Okay. Well, yes, thank you again for having me. I'm really excited to share our journey at Stoneleigh with you. We've opened as a public garden for just 6 years, so really a short amount of time. But the landscape is much older. It's about 150 years that it's been cultivated as a private estate. And we have about 42 acres to play with, so plenty of room to grow, and 8 full-time staff, including 5 in horticulture. And I'm really lucky to be part of such a wonderful team. And I have to tell you, this is awesome stuff. Like, I love what I do. We're having a lot of fun here. I mean, it's gardening, it's the best. So I'm excited to share, our progress and our transition in this space. First of all, I do want to orient to where we are. We're in the western suburbs of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania in the US. So I think we're about 12 miles from Center City, Philadelphia. And it's a suburban area. You can see us here on this red dot in the middle of the screen right here. And we're in an area we call the Main Line. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But this is a really pretty special area of the country because we call it America's garden capital. And there are like 38 public gardens within 35 miles in this area. And it's really incredible. And we feel fortunate to be part of such a wonderful collection of public gardens for everyone to enjoy. Now, I mentioned the Main Line, and this is an old map from 1871. It's our township, Lower Merion, but at the bottom of the screen where my laser pointer is, you see this thick black line that's kind of snaking across the bottom? That is the Pennsylvania Railroad, and at the time, it was really amping up its activity. And the Pennsylvania Railroad, the company, was one of the largest corporations in the entire world at the time. And what they were doing is they were buying up all this land around these railroad stops, and it was very bucolic and rural. They were selling these large tracts of land to the most wealthy and affluent families in Philadelphia. They were moving out and building their summer homes, and that's how Stoneleigh came to be. And here it is, the bottom left hand of the screen. It was the Ellis Farm at this time, and in 1878 is when it was formalized as an estate. So under new ownership in 1900, they wanted to really get into the landscape and do some different things. So here we see this landscape design from about 1913 or 14, I think. And the Olmsted brothers were hired. And if you haven't heard of the Olmsted brothers firm, they were the sons of the famed Frederick Law Olmsted, who is the father of American landscape architecture. And he did, Central Park in New York, Biltmore Estate down in Asheville, and really played a key role in creating the national park system. So when they came to Stoneleigh, they found it much like in this plan. It was designed in the Beaux-Arts style previously, so formal, alleys, axes, symmetry, geometry, but they came and designed in a much more different style. They were much more naturalistic. So they got rid of the straight lines and they added curves. They reduced a lot of the formal structures and emphasized kind of these big stately trees and sweeping vistas. And what we have now is really kind of a mix between, on a macro scale, a mix between this informal and formal in the garden. Now, this is a photo, black and white from 1940. I love these old photos. There was a company and they would fly these airplanes over Philadelphia between the First and Second World War and take these aerial photographs. And they did a lot of the old estates here. And so here's Stoneleigh. And you can see, first of all, it's very rural at that time. And you can see the characteristics of the Olmsted design here. You see the central main house. Let me see right here on the right-hand side of the screen. It sits at the top of a little hill. And to the left of it is called the Circle Garden. And in front is the Great Lawn. And in the back is the Meadow Vista. And these are really the key areas that the Olmsted brothers designed. And of course, you can also see this really glorious collection of mature trees even then. And, we have all these different maps from back then. Here you see another one from about 1915. You see the main house down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And it's a lot of fun to, I don't know, I really enjoy like going through these maps and finding the original trees and then looking in the landscape and saying, oh, is this still there? And there's a little cluster up here that's highlighted. you'll see, and it says like 28-inch magnolia, 26-inch buckeye. And if you go out in the garden now, walk out into the Great Lawn, this is what it looks like. It's this spectacular grouping of trees that are now at least 150 years old. And in the center is this giant cucumber magnolia. It's about 90 feet tall, and it's really spectacular. And sometimes, I see these big old trees and I think about the power and lasting impact of planting trees. I think as gardeners and horticulturists, oftentimes we put them in the ground and we might not think much about it, but look what happens after 100 years. I mean, they really change the landscape. And so it really makes us think about what our legacy will be when we're planting trees right now, what that will look like in 50 years and 100 years. Another old photo from a series we have, and you can see in the right-hand corner, you can just make out, I'll highlight it, it's this, it's an arborvitae, Eastern arborvitae, narrow evergreen. And we fast forward again to about 110 years. You can see it's the exact same tree right now, and it looks incredible. It's like an octopus. I love this thing. It's got these branches flopping all over the place. And really, it's a far cry from what so many people now, they shear this species mercilessly here into hedges, and we do a little bit too. But you never see this thing allowed to grow as it would. And one of the neat things that they did on this estate is they didn't prune a lot of these trees like lollipops. So we're left with a lot of really unusual and interesting forms like this one. And again, it gives you sort of this perspective of time in the garden. As we work in the garden, we're always thinking of the future, right? We're always planning and we're trying to envision what it will look like 5, 10, 20, 30 years. But when you start thinking scales of 100 years or more, and you think of that original design intent and what does it mean today versus what it meant back then. And it's something we thought a lot about here. So bringing it forward to modern times, in 2016, the Haas family, who lived here for 80 years, a wonderful family. They raised their 5 children here, and it was their family home. And they decided to donate Stoneleigh, all 42 acres, to Natural Lands. And Natural Lands is a land conservation organization. And I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but it was donated so that it could be opened up for everyone to enjoy. And just incredibly generous and an amazing gift to the community. And as we received this property, we had to think, what were we going to do with this? We were going to come to this historic garden and recreate what was there. Well, the more we thought about it, we're like, you know what? We were born with this conservation ethos from Natural Lands. And we decided that we were going to reimagine this historic landscape through a much more contemporary lens. And we wanted to create gardens that were beautiful, that were biodiverse, that were ecologically vibrant. And we use native plants at the foundation of everything that we do. And so, once we decided that, how are we going to determine what plants to grow here? Well, for us, we use these Environmental Protection Agency ecoregions. Some folks might think about political boundaries, the native plants of Pennsylvania. But for us, we use these. And the EPA developed these. And if you're not familiar with an ecoregion, it's a distinct geographical area with shared geology where plants and animals co-evolved over thousands of years to form these beneficial relationships. So we don't grow plants from the Great Plains and West. We don't grow plants from the boreal forest and tundra in Canada. And we don't grow plants from the southeastern part of Florida, which is subtropical. But everything in the middle is fair game. And so essentially, we're really growing plants from the eastern temperate forests and eastern grasslands of North America. And we're not overly strict. We'll grow things from parts of Texas and other places from time to time, but it's really our core area. And we focus on the mid-Atlantic and also the southeastern US increasingly, because of climate change. And I think, when we talk about our plant collections, traditionally, a lot of gardens have focused on taxonomic relationships or geographic relationships or historic relationships. But for us, we're growing native plants. And we sometimes hear people say they're boring, they're messy. And what we want to do is really get people excited about them. And so the first way that we build our collections are through cultivars. And these are species, these are varieties that are pendulous, that are dwarf, that are columnar, disease resistant, variegated foliage, prolonged flowering. Any form that will really increase the appeal of these native species to landowners and make them want to use them and make them more versatile and accessible. So that's the first way. The second way is we focus on wild collected species with permission, of course, and ethically. But these are the wild plants that are found all around us. These are the plants that we share our spaces with. You might drive by them in your car, you might see them when you're hiking. But for us, it's really important to foster and celebrate these plants, foster a connection with them and celebrate them, because they're really the best at supporting our local wildlife. And then lastly, we're working on plant collections that support both generalist and specialist insect populations. And those, of course, would be for our generalists. We're talking mostly about host plants here, not about pollinator or nectar. We're talking about host plants, like oak trees, which support hundreds of species of caterpillars, and willows and cherries, and pines. And then, of course, our specialist insects. These are the ones that really rely on certain species for their survival. And so, for instance, something like a pipevine swallowtail, their caterpillar only feeds on that one genus, and that's it. So they're an extreme specialist. And at Stoneleigh, we didn't have any pipevine swallowtails until we planted this vine, and now we see them in the garden. And then lastly, we focus on climate adapted plants increasingly. Now, this is a great example of actually how native plants are made more appealing through cultivars. This is inkberry, and here in the US in the Northeast, we don't have a ton of broadleaf evergreens because of the cold. So we're always on the lookout for new varieties, but inkberry is tried and true. You see it everywhere. It's honestly, it's a parking lot plant. Like you see it in Walmart parking lots. Not to its detraction, but it's just one of those plants you see it everywhere. But if you ever encounter this in the wild, it grows in low places, wet places. It gets really rangy and scraggly, probably 14 feet tall if it's not in a fire maintained area. And most consumers would never, ever plant this thing. But several decades ago, a seedling was selected out of a block of hundreds and had smaller leaves and a more compact form. And this one was called Shamrock. And it was a huge improvement. And so that got people really planting this plant all over the place. Then this variegated branch sport was found, isolated and propagated. It's called goldmine. So now we have this vibrant dwarf small leaf selection to use. And then even further, not long ago, a branch sport from goldmine was found, propagated, stabilized, and now we have this really chartreuse variety called all gold. And so we went from something that is naturally kind of scraggly and maybe not appealing, that wouldn't ever be planted in a large scale, to a plant that is now used all over the place. And so our goal is to inspire others to use more natives. And by these cultivars, it's really great to do that. Another example of how native species have become more versatile through cultivar selection is the redbud. And redbuds are probably, they're my top two favorite spring flowering native trees. The other, eastern dogwood, they're kind of neck and neck, but look how gorgeous this thing is. Oh my gosh, this is called Appalachian Red. It's a cultivar. And to me, it's probably the most beautiful and extravagant of our redbud selections in flower. Look at it's like electric pink. We have a number of these in our parking lot, and when they're doing their thing, people just kind of go crazy over them. And 15 years ago, before we had a lot of varieties, we kind of just thought about redbuds for their spring flowers, which are undeniably spectacular, but it was almost a one-trick pony. A very good trick, and nothing wrong with that. But there's been a lot of breeding over the last, and selections from the wild over the last 15 years. And so now we have all these different varieties and forms that we can use in so many different ways. So for instance, we have this small weeping white flowered form called Vanilla Twist, and you can train it on, a tree, or in this case, our lichgate, almost like a vine. And here it is in the fall. You see these awesome branches just kind of flop down on there. Or you can take and espalier this redbud and have an entirely different look. This one is called Black Pearl. And we wanted to sort of soften and create contrast against this somber gray stone wall, and it was the perfect plant to do that. And we love our stone walls at Stoneleigh. I know everyone does. And if you have them, they're great because it allows you to espalier, allows you to put something that's normally too big in a space, and you can fit it in there and kind of, again, soften the whole thing. And we also get a couple degrees of warmth out of that. So we put a lot of our marginally hardy species right up against the house, and it's kind of stiff competition to get space on the wall. So you've got to be pretty special. And then look at this. Oh my gosh, this is a variegated selection called Alley Cat, which seems like a really bad name for such a beautiful plant, but look at how striking it is in this dark corner of the garden. So this one species is now incredibly useful and hopefully exciting to gardeners who are looking to expand their palette into native trees. Now, I mentioned Natural Lands earlier. I did want to come back to that. Natural Lands is a nonprofit land conservation organization, as I mentioned, and we protect more than 135,000 acres in eastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey. We also own and operate 42 nature preserves and one public garden, which is Stoneleigh, and they're also in eastern PA and the Delaware Bay Shore. And they're really some of the most spectacular landscapes in the entire region. When I moved up to Pennsylvania from South Carolina. In South Carolina, we had a lot of open space still. It was easy to drive outside of the city, and there's a national park 20 minutes away. But I came here and I didn't really understand land conservation until I came here to move to the Philadelphia region. I was like, oh, there really isn't a lot of land. We desperately need these open spaces. We desperately need these natural spaces for our own wellness and our own well-being, and so to support our local ecology as well for others and for perpetuity. But I really understand and get it now. And the work that places like Natural Lands do is really important. And it's such a wonderful organization. And, we do find a great deal of inspiration from our nature preserves, and the wild places here, they really have so much to offer and so much to teach us. Nature, I think in its purest distillation, it brings us joy. Look at this. This is a joyful photo. It's amazing. So some people come to the outdoors because they might want to splash around in a muddy creek. I did that when I was a kid. Others might want to come and go out and study and investigate and sort of understand the natural world around them. Look at this beautiful eastern milk snake. I love reptiles, by the way. And so I get really excited about snakes and salamanders and things. Or for others, it brings you together, it brings you together in a concert. This is one of our preserves. It's called Cheslin, and it's Friday Night Lights. It's a great summer evening concert. And then, so others like me, for one, we like to get outdoors and get out into nature to get away from it all, to find some kind of solitude and a little bit of quiet. And I mentioned our nature preserves, about 23,000 acres that we protect and operate and steward. And a bunch of different habitats, coastal plain, mountains, Piedmont. And so really fortunate that we have all of this land that we can access. And we go out there and we botanize and we collect seeds and we grow them back in the garden. When we came to Stoneleigh, we had about 300 different varieties of plants. Like I said, it wasn't really a diverse place at that time. We now have 3,000 varieties of native plants in 8 years. And of that 3,000, 20% of them were wild collected from direct known wild origin. So 20% of our plants are from the eastern US. And then half of those, 10% or 300 varieties, are from our nature preserves at Natural Lands. So they're really local to us. They're the plants that we share our spaces with. And I don't know about you, but I love, I don't really love January. I'm gonna be honest. I hate January because it's cold, dark, and oftentimes snowy here, but I love the time in the greenhouse because that's when we sow our seeds. We collect these things and you see all these little green seedlings coming up, and it really sort of ignites your enthusiasm for what's to come in the year ahead. And what we do is we go out and we'll collect a lot of, tried and true beloved native plants, but also a lot of underused or underappreciated or just, kind of botanical interest only plants to grow out. And some of them are kind of fun. This is field chickweed, kind of a lousy name again, but it's such a beautiful plant and nobody grows this. You'll never see it offered. But look at these flowers. It's spring flowering, very romantic. It kind of creates a weed suppressing mat. So it's great. Grows in really dry places, but does really well in average soil too. We try to think about natives that are annuals. It's not something you see a lot of here, and beyond like Coreopsis and Gaillardia and some Rudbeckias and things like that. But this is one, this little charmer. I love it. It's called Plukia or marsh fleabane. And there's just some scientific names you love to say, right? I know I'm not alone. Plukia. I just love saying Plukia. But it's a really beautiful plant. It grows in salt marshes in the eastern US, but perfectly home in average soil or in a pitcher plant bog like this one. And it kind of dances around, very well behaved. It seeds in, but not so much that you can't control it. And maybe my favorite part, besides these little pink flowers, is that you take the leaves and you can crush them up, and it's so aromatic, really wonderful. This is a kufia, and I came here 8 years ago. I was exploring, driving around in my car, and like I always do, my head was looking at the roadsides in a very safe way. And I noticed this thing that caught my eye. And caught my eye. I stopped the car and very cautiously got off to the side of the road and went to investigate this ditch. And here I found this little plant. And I thought, oh gosh, that's a kufia. And surely that's an exotic plant that's escaped. But I took some cuttings back and I keyed it out. And no, it's Clammy kufia. It's our lone native species in the eastern US. And it's an annual. But it's really cool. Look at it. It's got these little kufia flowers, like little bat faces. And maybe best of all, it's so sticky. Like I love we have kids in the garden, like to grab a branch of this and like touch this thing. It literally is like, it feels like it has glue on it. So a very cool plant. Another one that I love for drier sites, this is called blue curls. This is not widely used either. And this came from an area near the beach in one of our preserves in New Jersey. And you can just scatter this thing on the ground and you'll see these little green seedlings germinate. They kind of sit there, one of those plants is like sitting there at 3 inches tall. And you're thinking, okay, when's this going to do anything? And then in September, all of a sudden, boom, it's big. And it has these extraordinary blue flowers. And you can see why it's called blue curls, because it's got this little whoop-de-doo that comes across the top. And of course, we're really lucky here to have a great diversity of sunflowers, of helianthus. And my brother's in the plants too. And so we go plant collecting together. He lives in South Texas. So there's so many interesting things there. And we were down there a couple of years ago collecting and came across this silverleaf sunflower, Helianthus argophyllus. And, it was about 8 or 10 feet tall. It's endemic to what's called the sand sheet area down there. And where it's dry, it didn't get that big. But we collected seeds, grew it out here in the garden. And it's this monstrous thing. It gets like 16 feet tall in 1 year. Look at that. Amazing. It's such a showstopper. And then on the right, another, just an underappreciated plant that's an annual. This is annual sunflower. And I think this is amazing because it is the parent of these giant single-headed sunflowers, that you see by the thousands in fields, the big giant sunflowers. But that's the original. And it's a really fantastic plant. It flowers all season. Insects love it and deserves a lot more love than it gets. And so we came to Stoneleigh back in 2016. It really was much as it had been in the 1940s, in that black and white photograph. We had incredible trees, lovely hardscapes. The Olmsted Brothers, imprint was there. And it was essentially a landscape garden. And again, it was all, by all accounts, a magnificent place, but it hadn't been maintained in about 5 years. There were a lot of open beds that were really weedy. A lot of invasive species had moved in. But, we knew it had this incredible potential. And we were really excited because we could take this garden that had been really managed in a traditional way for 150 years and do something completely different. And, we had these great swaths of turf, 14 acres to be exact. There was ivy everywhere and still a lot of places. We're still transitioning it. And we had close to 6 acres of pachysandra and almost no perennials. So we're really excited. And, when we think about turf and we think about reducing turf, and we talk about that a lot because it is a great thing to do. But when you have a small staff, there are 5 full-time horticulturists here, you imagine 42 acres, it can be pretty tough to just turn turn it into meadow or turn it into bed. These are high maintenance areas. And so we thought, we'll do no-mow. And I know you all are familiar with no-mow. We just stopped mowing about 10 acres. And here in the Great Lawn, you can see that the no-mow really does create a nice sense of space there. And it also, I love the contrast. And of course, it's much better for wildlife. But we found it's not a panacea. It still gets a lot of invasive species, aggressive species that come up through there, like stilt grass, like Canada thistle, that we then have to manage. So it's not a cure-all, but it's a great placeholder for now. And we would love to put these areas in meadow or matrix plantings at some point in the future. But for now, it's pretty good. This next set of photos are pretty interesting. I wanted to show, we have a series from 1913. I want to show what it looked like then, what it looks like in 2016 when we came, and then what it looks like now. So we can kind of see how the landscape's been changing. And here we see it, 2013. I think it's pretty atmospheric looking, pretty cool. You've got Boston ivy all over it. Not a lot of action in front, pretty bare. This is what it looked like when we came. The ivy's gone. It's a little austere and a little austere for my liking, and still not a lot happening in the front. But you do see these large plane trees on either side. And it's what it looks like now. We've put in some woody plant species like this Taylor juniper. We've got the no-mow coming up. You see some vines starting to green the house. And if we swing around to the side, this is called the sun terrace. One of the first beds that we did. And here you see these Taylor junipers peeking out over here. And we needed a small tree for this space. And we planted this variety of eastern cottonwood right here. And it's called Purple Tower. So it's columnar, so it doesn't get very wide, but it gets pretty tall. And it has this wonderful purple foliage. And if you ever, cultivated cottonwood, and it has these really thick plasticky leaves that are really kind of almost artificial feeling, but they're remarkable. And maybe the best thing about this tree is that when we get a little bit of wind, when that kicks up, the leaves, they really dance and jitter and move around a lot of it. And it's not something that we often talk about, I don't think, but how our plants move in the landscape can really elevate the garden experience. And this is one of the best native species to do that. Another one of my favorites. Oh, I love this thing. This is the fringe tree, American fringe tree, or Chionanthus virginicus. And look at how it dances in the wind. It's just so elegant. One of my top 10 favorite small trees, native small trees, just a magnificent plant. Now, if we move around to the other side of the house, you see we tried to sort of emphasize some of that verticality with this crazy sugar maple on the left. It's called Newton Century, and it's about 3 feet wide and at this point 30 feet tall. It's pretty wild. We also have some foundational plants in here. There's a southern red cedar. This one's called Brody. We grow about 25 different now of eastern red cedars. And this is one of my favorite for foundational use. And then southern magnolia, which to me is one of our most iconic native tree species in the US and east or west in the whole US. And you see this thing planted everywhere in temperate areas across the world. Central America, South America, Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia, it's everywhere. And for good reason. It has these great evergreen leaves, huge lemon-scented flowers. And this one I really like. It's called Cape Harris. It's a dwarf, so it's a great plant to put next to your house if you don't want an 80-foot monster there. And a really fantastic plant. Now, way over here on the left of the screen, I wanted to point this out. This is a box elder. This is a native species of maple that most people don't think twice about. It grows on the side of the road, waste places. You don't see it cultivated very often, but this plant, when it cools down, the weather gets cold, and those leaves drop off, we're left with this really beautiful espalier selection, and it's called white lightning. And what happens is when the cold hits, the bark turns this really sparkling golden color, and it's pretty amazing. It's kind of magical, really. And speaking of magic, and for me personally, I've always felt that garden magic, and I'm talking about true garden magic, not like garden artistry or beauty or something like that, but true garden magic, it lies in the unconventional, it lies in the unexpected, the sort of sense of discovery that you get. It even lies in the mistakes. And we don't we don't really want to try and be a perfect garden. We don't want to be too fussy. We want to allow some of these things to exist, and it doesn't always have to make sense. You know, like this pile of electric pink redbud flowers that washed up against this woodland phlox. It's really beautiful. Or maybe it's perhaps catching the sun's rays, you know, cutting through the morning mist in this meadow. It's garden magic. Or maybe you come across this sweet little red fox curled up on the mulch pile. And again, it's the magic lies in the imperfections. And, you know, it was with this thought that we approached the plane tree in the center of this photo. You know, this grand tree, it was massive, the same size as the one back here, was like its twin. It was a huge tree when we came here 8 years ago. It was already declining a little bit. It suffered from anthracnose and canker stain. And once that happened, you know, that's a really tough disease, and most plane trees can't beat it. And so sure enough, year by year, it started declining. And we really knew that we had to do something. But the more we thought about it, we thought, you know, this thing's been around here for like 150 years. Why do we want to cut this down, get the stump grinder, and like obliterate its memory entirely? So we thought, you know, let's just scale it down. So we talked with our arborist, and they came. Here you see the left-hand side. We just scaled it down and created this tree sculpture, and it's big, you know, and it's in a prominent place. And a lot of people are like, what did you do? But a lot of people are like, that's really cool. And so we planted American wisteria at the base. It's really starting to grow up now. We can't wait for it to bloom. Of course, insects are all over this thing, lots of wildlife. And, you know, our trees, they're such a part of our landscape for so long that they don't have to go away right away. They have so much more to give, even when they're living. This tree still has so much story left to its life and so much left to give the landscape that we're really glad to continue to have it for a long time into the future. And, you know, our birds love it. We've got all these woodpeckers that come on and perch on them. They love to get their little beaks in these little nooks and crannies for insects. This is a pileated woodpecker. This is a northern flicker. And we have a lot of these tree sculptures in the garden, and they all look pretty different. You know, as long as it's safe, we'll generally try to leave it. Some, not always, but most of the time. And we always put vines on them. And you can see here, this is a cross vine that's just getting started on this one and make this way up the trunk. Here's another. This is a really old English yew, died about 4 years ago, and it's like a piece of art. And so it's so pretty that we never plant a vine on this. It doesn't need any embellishment. It's just pretty amazing just the way it is. And, you know, with our native plants, we like to have fun with them. Gardening, it's fun, right? I mean, we have these rules, but I think the fun part is not worrying too much about them. And so we try to use common plants in creative ways. Like this is Ozark witch hazel. We got this idea. You're like, you know what if we found like 3 different cultivars that were different flowers? They flowered at the same time. We put them in pots and then see what happens. So we got these all in bare roots, and we put them in like 5 different pots, 3 in each pot, planted them out in the spring. We had this. We rewarded this kind of like spring show of yellow, orange, and red flowers. We also had all of these tree wells here, you know, this really traditionally maintained tree wells. And I don't know about you all, but, you know, we have these mulch volcanoes they do here, and 50-foot wide, sterile, chemical maintained mulch tree wells. And we're like, oh, we need to do something about that. So we plant our tree wells in all kinds of different ways. Sometimes we just do no-mow right up to the tree. Sometimes we'll do mixed perennials. Sometimes we'll do monoculture, like this eastern prickly pear cactus underneath this redbud. It's just kind of a fun way to have a neat plant. It flowers in the spring. It's really beautiful. And by the way, this redbud, also one of my favorite in flower of the 30 varieties. This is one of my favorites. It's called Pauline Lily. Pretty uncommon, but look at these gorgeous light pink flowers. Now, we also had very few hedges in the garden. It was, when you walk through the garden when we came, it was wide open. And so there wasn't a lot of that sense of discovery, but we knew that we had, you know, a really nice opportunity to experiment with native hedges. And so we planted all these different hedges, and when we're planting this one, this is Magnolia grandiflora again, Southern Magnolia. It's a dwarf selection called Teddy Bear. It's a great name. It has these really short internodes. I don't know if you can tell from the photo, but so when we were planning this, you know, our guests would walk up and they're like, oh, what are you doing? I didn't know you could use that plant like that as a hedge and more than one. They're so used to using English laurel or Eastern arborvitae here. We see so many of the same types of hedges. And so, we really have experimented with different species. This is an area that had a hedge historically. Circle garden is on the left, and on the right, you see this old hemlock hedge. This is from, again, 100 years ago. And you see, I do want to point out this tree. Let me see here. Oops. Up here in the right-hand side, it is a catalpa. And just keep that in mind. But this hedge was long gone when we came in 2016, probably decades. And this is what it looked like. And we really wanted to separate these spaces again, create more definition. And put our heads together, and we thought, we don't want to do a monoculture. We wanted something a little bit different. We wanted something that was visually dynamic, maybe more resilient to diseases, something that benefited a broader array of wildlife. So we came up with what we call a wildlife hedge, and it's a double row hedge. It's about 200 feet long, and we have 70 varieties of woody plants that are planted together. And the idea is to shear them all at about 8 feet. And so it's now in its third year. We've sheared the top now, starting to come into form. It's looking pretty cool. But this is so much fun. It was really hard to design because we're thinking about evergreen, deciduous, air circulation, shearability, textural contrast, light conditions. And it's sort of an experiment. This is what part of it looks like. This is a variegated redbud that we have paired with a variegated Alyssium or Anise, smooth hydrangea. We have probably about 10 different species of vines running through this thing, all kinds of perennials on the bottom. And here's what it looks like from another side. You can see these summer sweets or clethras are now starting to bleed into the hedge here in the fall, and it looks kind of interesting. We take an aerial view, drone shot. You can see the hedge coming across the middle of the screen. The circle garden is over here on top. And this space is maybe 2 or 3 years old. I think 3 now. It used to be the tennis court. So when we came, there was a tennis court in between those sitting walls. And we put in this new garden. We call it Catalpa Court because that same catalpa we saw in the photo from 100 years ago is at the top of the screen. It now towers over this space. It's the state champion. And the centerpiece of this is this water garden. It's biofiltrated. So we just planted all these plants in straight gravel, no soil. And the plants and microorganisms do all the work. And it's been a lot of fun. And if you see up here peeking out this pergola, when we came 2016, this is what it looked like. It was really atmospheric. Like, oh man, this is great. But it needs some work, So we repointed it and we repaired the top, put a new oak and juniper top on it. And we just knew this would be the perfect place to showcase all these native vines because people tend to get a little bit anxious when it comes to vines, native or non-native. They think they're too wild. They think they're too hard to control, and they are. But that's what's so special about them. There is no other plant that does what they do, and they're the essential plant for a romantic garden, for a romantic feel. So we're like, this is great. We can showcase all these native species. Got our list together, designed it, and we planted it with our volunteers in one day about 4 years ago. And this is what it looks like now. It's really grown in pretty well. You can see we have probably 17 different native species here. And one that I want to point out right in the center of the screen, this is a native rose. And most people don't know that we have a native climbing rose, but we do. And it's called climbing prairie rose. And this one's native to Pennsylvania even. And look how gorgeous this thing is. I mean, it's spectacular. It's not given support. It kind of rambles a little bit, but if you let it grow up, it really does its thing. We also have, some familiar plants like coral honeysuckle, which to me is probably the top flowering native vine of the eastern U.S. You see it in red primarily, but we thought we'd have some fun, and we found a yellow one and an orange one, and we put them all in the same hole. And so now in the spring, we have like this honeysuckle fireworks that you get. We also thought this would be a really good place for a couple of weeping trees. And we thought, you know what? We'll plant this weeping yellowwood, which is a pretty rare bird. I mean, it's a rare selection. It's a weeping plant. We'll put this thing on the pergola. We'll train it over the top. it'll flop over there, and when it flowers, it'll look like a wisteria. Well, if you've ever grown this species, you know that it flowers every 3 to 4 years. It's very irregular. And so it didn't flower for the longest time. And then last year, it flowered. And what's wild is when this plant flowers, all of the specimens, the entire region flower at the same time so they can pollinate each other. I don't know how they know, but they do. And sure enough, it kind of looked like wisteria. And speaking of wisteria, we couldn't have a pergola without it. And this is Kentucky wisteria. It's similar to the much more common American wisteria. This one has much longer panicles. They're like a foot long. It smells really good, and a great plant. Speaking of American wisteria, we use that too. And this is one that we pruned as a shrub. In fact, we have about 7 in this bioswale that we pruned as a shrub about 6 years ago. And it's a really great way to kind of condense those flowers and have it on a scale that you can really appreciate at a much more personal level. And you see how this American, it's got these really tight flowers, almost like, I think they look like purple pineapples. So it's kind of cool. We have trees that are like vines and vines that are like shrubs. And then our vines, they don't all have to go up. So we had this bare patch in the garden, and it was really troublesome. One of those areas, I know, I'm talking about, you just weed, and you're like, I need to do something with this. But again, with a small staff, we didn't want to plant more than we could maintain. So we have what we call placeholder plantings or placeholder plants. And this is a really great one. It's called thicket creeper. And it's called Parthenocissus incerta, closely related to Virginia creeper, which is much more common. But this one doesn't tend to climb quite as much. And so it's really the perfect thing to plant as a ground cover here. And so, maybe in a couple of years, we'll be ready to take this on. We can remove it and put something else in. But for now, it's a really great way to suppress the weeds. Of course, speaking of neglected beds, we did have a great many of those when we came to Stoneleigh. This is one of them behind the house. And we were out there one day with shovels kind of digging around, and they hit something hard. They're like, oh, what is this thing? They dug out around it. It was this hatch. We're like, this is kind of amazing. So we ran into the basement. Somebody's like, I think I know what that is. Ran into the basement. We kind of huddled down this long hallway, and we looked up, and sure enough, there was the hatch. It turns out it was the coal chute. And it's where the coal truck would come in and dump all the coal down this hatch into the cart, which would then be wheeled into the boiler room to burn. And so this area is forever known as the coal chute bed. And if you pay attention to this light post right here, so this is what it looked like then, and here's what it looks like now. Totally different. And a couple interesting plants I want to point out here. We have this really great prairie willow in the middle. And we're always looking for willows that are really smaller and more usable in small scale gardens, because willows are among the best of our trees and shrubs for supporting caterpillars. And not only that, but they flower really early. So they support mining bees, which are specialist bees that need these early flowers like willows and red maples. They also are really great for generalist bees like mason bees, which love them. They're powerhouse pollinators. But this one is one we coppice every 2 or 3 years. Got great silver foliage and stays a nice tidy ball. Then also up in this part of the screen, this really beautiful red flowered shrub. This is a dwarf red buckeye, and it's called Aesculus pavia humilis. And it's so extravagant in flower, isn't it? Oh my gosh. And most of the time we see this as a small tree here, but this is a shrub form. So it's particularly useful if you like to attract hummingbirds like we do and look at them at eye level. When this thing is in flower, I kind of creep up to it because there's always a hummingbird somewhere around here, and you can just sit and watch them go to work. And it's really completely underused in the landscape here. We did have a old swimming pool and pool house at Stoneleigh when we came. Here's what it looked like. It was built in the 60s, kind of interesting, but kind of it was located in a prime spot and not something that we really thought would be appropriate for this next phase in the garden. So we removed it and planted it. And it's pretty neat because you can really physically alter spaces just with woody plants. This is at the top of the screen. It's called Summer Cascade. It's a river birch, and it's a weeping form. We created this threshold into this space with it. And by the way, on the left-hand side of the screen, we said I love these honeysuckles. This is probably my favorite in flower. It's called Tangerine Princess, and it's this striking orange. It's pretty hard to find, but if you find it, just snap it up because it's a real winner. Here's what by the way, the weeping branches, they create like this interesting entryway into this garden. Once you come in, this is what you see. You've got this new terrace here. It's in the shape of the original pool. We've got another mixed hedge in the background. And we wanted to take these white pines and arborvitae, which so many of our neighbors use as hedges, and kind of deconstruct a little bit and change it up. We put in these carnivorous plant bogs here that are very charismatic. Here's a close-up view of what they look like. And we're really lucky to have so many wonderful native bog species, whether they're Venus flytraps or sundews or pitcher plants or orchids. You can put a lot of diversity in such a small space. We probably have 100 different plants in this little bed right here. And by the way, this is what it looks like from the outside of the pool house. It's when we first came. And here you can see it is now. We deconstructed the hedge out. You see the nomos in flower and the main house peeking out from the back. And now we're 6 years in to this transition, and we really start seeing this big picture taking shape. We've had an up close and personal view, just how these spaces changed, and it's been really rewarding. The best part, we've seen a lot more wildlife with what we planted, but it's been incredible to welcome our community into this landscape. And, it really has come to life in so many different ways. And it's been awesome. So that's it. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you, Ethan. That was amazing. And a few things that I didn't realize was that you were experimenting and playing with cultivars. So there was me thinking, if you're into natives, you're like a purist and it has to be native. So do the cultivars necessarily have the same wildlife values and attract, or might that vary? How does that work?
I think it's pretty unclear right now. There have been a few studies where some of the cultivars didn't seem to be as valued, but then some of the cultivars were more valued. So I think we need more information, more replication of these experiments. But it's, as it's so nuanced. Because a plant might be a dwarf, and I think that's a good thing. And if it's a dwarf, somebody with a small yard can have this oak tree that supports a lot more insects. And, personally, we have a lot of tension in this country about native plants and non-native plants. I think we all need to loosen up a little bit and let's garden. Let's garden. Some non-native species are great for ecological value. We love native species as well, and that's what I would recommend. But let's just garden and
Well, I mean, you definitely are the loosener upper of the native planting world in the States. And I mean, I just when I came to Stoneleigh, I had a completely different view of, oh my goodness, it's so obvious that you've got this sense of fun. And as you mentioned the word romanticism quite a few times, so fun and romance, and it just shows. But where do you get your design inspiration from? So take away the kind of plants. I mean, where do you look for ideas, or do they, how do they come to you?
That's a good question. We design collaboratively oftentimes here in the garden. I work with some talented folks, and we have a great team. And so ideas come from all over the place. But I think we just like to not be too restricted by rules and by what people think you should do. And gardening is fun. If it feels right, do it. That's what I think. There's a lot of inspiration from the natural world. You see combinations from our fellow gardens. Chanticleer is 3 miles away. They're amazing. I visit some amazing gardens, of course, in England that are just mind-blowing. And so we're lucky to have a lot of inspiration.
And also lucky to have the natural lands, kind of other landscapes that you can go and explore and take seeds from. That's just such an amazing resource for you, isn't it, as well? And
yeah.
I mean, kind of on your doorstep, but just to have that, to be able to go and explore, that must be such a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. It's kind of something not really part of my regular job, but it's something I do on the weekends or
Yeah.
evenings, vacation, whatever. I just love it. And it's a great connection to the organization because we're growing the plants that, we're stewarding and protecting. So it's a great way to connect Stoneleigh with the broader organization too.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't realize quite how much you were propagating at Stoneleigh. So, obviously that gives you a huge amount of fun and interest and exploring. And that's a sort of more of a winter kind of activity, is it? Or it depends, I guess, autumn and winter.
Yeah, we do a lot of summer cuttings too, but a lot of seed. We get seeds are great because you get a lot for cheap, and you get a lot of genetic diversity with seeds too. So
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So Stoneleigh is the only garden that